Atomic Owl feels like a lost arcade action game pulled straight out of a retro era, but underneath its classic presentation is a surprisingly difficult action roguelike that consistently pushes players to adapt and survive. While the game delivers a fast-paced combat and satisfying platforming, some frustrating design choices hold it back from reaching its full potential. The story follows Hideko, who has been in prison for 2 years after being ambushed by the powerful Omega Wing. During that time, Omega Wing uses a mysterious force known as the Dark Feather to corrupt Hideko's companions and turn them against their own world. After finally being freed by Vizimata, Hideko begins a dangerous journey to rescue his allies and stop Omega Wing before the Blade Wing civilization is completely destroyed. While the story itself is fairly straightforward, it does enough to keep the action moving and gives players a reason to continue progressing through the game. The world building leans heavily into fantasy and sci-fi themes, mixing mechanical elements with ancient warrior traditions and supernatural powers tied into the Dark Feather. Throughout the adventure, you slowly learn more about the fall of the Blade Wings and how Omega Wings gain control over Hideko's former allies. The narrative is not necessarily groundbreaking, but it works well for the type of game Atomic Owl is trying to be. The focus is clearly more on gameplay and action rather than deep storytelling, but the lore and character setup still help create motivation behind the consistent battles and boss encounters. When it comes to the presentation, Atomic Owl does a really good job capturing the feel of classic retro action games while still modernizing certain aspects to make the experience feel fresh. The pixel art style immediately stands out with detailed environments, colorful effects, and impressive character designs that fit the game's fast-paced tone. From dark underground areas to dangerously enemy-filled zones, the environments have a strong old-school arcade aesthetic that constantly reminds players of classic platformers from previous generations. The enemy designs are also creative, especially some of the larger bosses and corrupted Blade Wing warriors you encounter throughout the game. Each area introduces new visual themes and hazards that actually help prevent the environments from feeling too repetitive visually even during long play sessions. The animations are smooth as well, especially during combat and movement sequences. Hideko's attacks, dashes, and jumps all flow together nicely, which becomes important during more difficult encounters where precision movements matters. Effects like explosions, projectiles, and special attacks also add extra intensity to combat without making the screen feel overly cluttered most of the time. The sound design is another strong point. Audio effects for attacks, enemy hits, movements, and environmental interactions all help make combat feel impactful. The soundtrack especially stands out because it fully embraces the retro-inspired identity of the game. Many of the tracks sound like they could have come directly from classic action platformers, using energetic themes that match the pace of the gameplay extremely well. Some boss themes in particular help elevate the tension during major fights, making encounters feel more intense and rewarding. Voice work is somewhat mixed overall. However, certain performances sound solid and it fits the characters, while others can feel inconsistent or lacking emotion during important moments. Performance on the Xbox Series X was smooth throughout most of the experience. The game maintained 60 frames per second consistently during exploration and combat, which is extremely important for a game built around fast reactions and precision movement. Outside of a few minor bugs and occasional platforming issues, the overall technical performance remains solid. The gameplay is where Atomic Owl spends most of its focus, combining action, platforming, hack and slash combat, a roguelike progression system into a consistently challenging experience from the very beginning. The game pushes players to stay aggressive while also reacting carefully to enemy attacks, traps, and environmental hazards. Movement plays a huge role in the overall experience. You spend a large amount of time running, double jumping, dashing, wall jumping, and navigating dangerous platforming sections filled with spikes, projectiles, collapsing surfaces, and enemies designed to knock you off balance. Thankfully, the controls feel responsive for most of the parts of the game, which helps the platforming remain enjoyable even during difficult sequences. The combat focus less on complex combo systems and more on positioning, timing, and survival. Instead of memorizing long attack strings, players are encountered to carefully manage enemy spacing while learning attack patterns and reacting quickly during intense encounters. Some enemies attack aggressively at close range, while others consistently pressure you from a distance using projectile attacks that can quickly overwhelm the screen. As the game progresses, encounters become increasingly chaotic. Certain sections almost feel like bullet hell sequences due to the amount of projectiles, enemies, and hazards happening simultaneously. During these moments, movement becomes just as important as attacking because standing still for even a few seconds can quickly lead to being unalived. Boss fights are one of the highlights of the game. Many bosses require players to fully understand the movement system and carefully learn attacks patterns over multiple attempts. Some encounters can actually feel overwhelming at first, but finally overcoming difficult bosses creates a strong sense of accomplishment that fits well within roguelike structures. The roguelike progression system is built around repeated runs where failure becomes part of the learning process. Every time you become unalive, you return stronger with new upgrades, abilities, or additional knowledge about enemy behavior and level layouts. This creates a gameplay loop focused on consistent improvement rather than immediate success. Over time, players slowly unlock new abilities and tools that expand combat options and improve survivability. This progression system helps make repeated runs feel rewarding early on, especially when experimenting with different upgrades and strategies. However, this is actually where some of the game's biggest issues begin to appear. While Atomic Owl has a strong gameplay foundation, the roguelike system do not always feel fully developed enough to maintain long-term excitement. After several runs, the overall structure can begin feeling repetitive because the variety between encounters, upgrades, and progression paths is somewhat limited compared to stronger roguelike games currently on the market. Because of this, there are moments where Atomic Owl feels like it may have worked better as a more traditional action platformer instead of leaning so heavily into roguelike mechanics. The core combat and movement systems are enjoyable enough on their own, but the repeated run structure sometimes slows the pacing rather than improving it. Difficulty balancing can also become frustrating at times. Certain encounters throw large groups of enemies, projectiles, and environmental hazards at players simultaneously, creating situations that can feel unfair rather than challenging. This issue becomes even more noticeable because Hideko primarily uses close-range melee combat, forcing us players to stay dangerously close to enemies while avoiding incoming attacks from every direction. Some platforming sections can also become frustrating due to occasional bugs and imprecise collisions detection. There were moments where jumps or movement felt slightly inconsistent, especially during fast-paced sequences requiring perfect timing. Combined with fall death sections that force additional backtracking, these moments can interrupt the flow of the experience. Weapon balance is another issue. Some weapons and abilities clearly feel more effective than others, making certain playstyles feel less valuable during later sections of the game. More balancing between combat options would help encourage experimentation and variety throughout repeated runs. The sound of the voice acting, while decent overall, can also feel uneven in quality depending on the scene. Some characters sound convincing and energetic, while others lack the emotional delivery needed to make important moments feel impactful. Despite these issues, Atomic Owl still manages to maintain entertaining thanks to its strong presentation, responsive controls, and satisfying action gameplay loop to a degree. At its best, Atomic Owl delivers a fun blend of retro-inspired platforming, fast-paced action combat, and roguelike progression systems wrapped inside a stylish pixel art presentation. The movement feels responsive, the soundtrack captures the old-school atmosphere perfectly, and the boss encounters create several memorable moments throughout the adventure. However, repetitive roguelike elements, balancing problems, and occasional technical frustrations prevent the game from fully reaching its potential. Players who actually enjoy challenging action platformers and retro-inspired roguelikes will likely still find plenty to enjoy here, especially if they appreciate games built around mastering mechanics through repeated attempts. For players looking for a smoother or a more casual experience, some of the difficulty spikes and repetitive progression systems may become frustrating over time. For that, I give Atomic Owl a 3 out of 5. Thank you for tuning into the Gamer Section, your home for independent gaming journalism. If you enjoyed this review, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your post notification bell so you will never miss future reviews, interviews, podcasts, and gaming coverage right here on the Gamer Section.